Hello and welcome to By the Book. This is the podcast for women in their second season, navigating reinvention, calling, business and the sacred transitions of midlife. I'm Johanne Hewlett and I'm here to help you build your God-led business with faith, wisdom and confidence. So let's begin. By the Book. As we approach the close of this January Reset series, I want to invite you to slow down for a moment. Not because we're running out of things to say, I never do, but because this is the kind of truth that doesn't land when we rush past it. Now, over the last few episodes, we've been gently reorienting, not pushing forward, not planning yet, but returning to centre. So today I want us to just sit with a question that quietly governs far more of our lives than we often realise. How does God actually define success? Because until that question is settled, nothing else will ever quite feel steady. Many women enter midlife carrying an unspoken pressure. It sounds like, surely by now my life should look like something, or I don't want to waste this season, or I've learned so much, surely it should amount to more. Now, those thoughts don't come from nowhere. They're formed by a culture that equates worth with visibility and success with momentum. Even in Christian spaces, we can absorb the idea that obedience should be obvious, measurable, visible, affirmed. But when you read scripture carefully, that assumption, it begins to unravel. Jesus never frames success the way that we do. In John 15, he talks about fruit, not outcomes, not recognition, not reach. He says, "By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit." What's striking is how quiet that image is. Fruit doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rush. It doesn't demand attention. It grows slowly, often invisibly, as the natural result of staying connected to the vine. And Jesus is very clear, fruit doesn't come from striving, it comes from abiding. And this is where modern Christian thinking often goes wrong. We've absorbed the idea that fruit looks like productivity, influence, or growth. But Scripture, it never defines fruit that way. Fruit is the internal evidence of a life rightly aligned with God. It's character shaped over time. It's obedience that's practiced consistently and faithfulness maintained, even when nothing is affirmed. In other words, fruit is who you are becoming, not what you are being applauded for. One of the most countercultural truths of a biblical worldview is this: meaning is not found in outcomes, it's found in obedience. We touched on this in the last episode. Now, that idea, it cuts against both secular success culture and therapeutic Christianity. The world tells us that meaning comes from achievement. Therapeutic culture tells us it comes from self-expression, whereas Scripture, it tells us that it comes from faithfulness. That's not a popular message, but it's a stabilizing one. Hebrews 11 has become increasingly important to me as I've grown older. It's often celebrated as a chapter about victory, but if you read it honestly, it's far more sobering than that. Some people saw promises fulfilled, whereas others didn't, yet they were still commended. The text says, "These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised." That single sentence dismantles the idea that success must look successful in our lifetime. God's approval is not dependent on visible outcomes. This matters deeply in your second season, because by now you've lived long enough to know that effort doesn't always produce results, that obedience doesn't always lead to affirmation, that faithfulness is not always rewarded publicly. And yet Scripture never lowers its estimation of obedience simply because it was costly or unseen. If anything, it elevates it. I think midlife is often when God gently begins to wean us off applause, not as a punishment, but as protection, because applause, it can be addictive, and dependence on recognition quietly erodes courage, discernment, and authority. When your sense of worth no longer depends on being seen, something steadier begins to form. You become harder to manipulate, harder to rush, and harder to derail. Now, that is not a weakness, that's maturity. Obedience was never meant to be justified by visibility. It was meant to be rooted in trust. If you're in a season where your life feels slow, quieter, less visible, or less impressive, I want you to hear this clearly. Quiet does not mean unfruitful. Hidden does not mean wasted. And unapplauded does not mean unsuccessful. Fruit always grows underground first. Galatians 6 says, "Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we don't give up." Notice what the text assumes, that weariness is possible, that reward is not immediate. Faithfulness is the requirement, not speed, not visibility, not outcome control, just perseverance. So as we continue to step into 2026, you don't need a louder voice or a more impressive plan. You need a settled heart, a heart anchored in God's definition of fruit, not the world's demand for applause. Because once that's settled, everything else can be built slowly, faithfully, and without fear. This January Reset series was not about pushing you forward. It was about helping you to stand firmly again. So carry this with you as we move into whatever comes next. God is not asking you to impress. He is cultivating fruit, and fruit, unlike noise, lasts. If this episode has spoken to you, please share it with a friend. Please download your free daily check-in worksheet. It's a simple morning rhythm that helps you hear God, find clarity, and stay anchored as you step into your second season. You'll find the links in the show notes, along with details of my book, By the Book, and my courses if you'd like me to walk this journey with you. Until next time, go faithfully, go boldly, and go by the book.